These over here are the M5 MAX MacBook Pros, one 16-inch, one 14-inch, and on paper they look exactly the same, identical 18 CPU cores. What if I told you that this is not everything that Apple actually told you? Is it actually worth paying the extra $300 to upgrade the GPU cores from 32 to 40 cores? Should you go with the base model or should you upgrade? Apart from the physical differences, are there any differences when going with a 16-inch? Well, I've been testing them and now I can show you. Now, I'm not going to go into detail what's new on the M5 Max. You can check out my short form content if you'd like to see that. But in essence, one of the biggest things that Apple has told you is that they've rebranded their core naming. Now, the performance cores are called Supers.
Show me.
And the efficiency cores are called Performant cores. And if you'd like to know if there's anything more to it than just marketing, then I'm sure some people will point it out in the comment section below. And the second big thing with the M5 Max chips is that the GPU cores now have a neural engine attached to each GPU core, which should increase the AI and GPU performance, but not every single application is actually able to utilize that. For example, I came across that issue and I was wondering, why is my M4 Max a lot better than the M5 Max? And then I discovered it, if you haven't seen the short yet. And by the way, if you want to pick up any of the M5 Max MacBook Pros, please don't buy them from Apple website. I found that there's already a way to get them cheaper. If you don't believe me, check the links out in the video description below. I'm seeing already a $50 saving, and that is not the student discount, if you're wondering. In a minute, you're going to see a lot of benchmarks, and if you think that it's too small for you to read and you'd like to get access to that, scan this QR code and sign up our newsletter, and then you'll get access to that, because these are just a little bit of the whole benchmark database. So if you'd like to get access to that, sign up for that. Link in the description below. By the way, Cinebench R26 will not be supported on these new M5 Max, which means that Apple has worked with Cinebench to optimize it to the R26. My question is, has Apple paid for Cinebench to optimize their benchmark for Apple's silicon? And then are we not going to see that performance increase in some of the actual applications? Well, that's what I wanted to find out, and I'm going to tell you. Now, let me show you the big difference, what's actually going on. I've got Cinebench R26 open on both of them. And by the way, this is a real workload that some actual creators use. They want to render something on 3D, and this is where all of the CPU gets used. What I'm going to also do is get up our power delivery, and you can see it on both sides. Both of the systems are on high power mode, so they're going to give us as much power as possible on both sides. And if I'm going to press go on both sides, we're going to see something very, very interesting. Now we're going to do a single test. I'm going to press go and then MX power. Now keep an eye on the package power and what is going on in there. Look, the 16-inch went to 85 watts, which was the same as on the 14-inch. But if you look at the actual timeline, how far down it goes, the 14-inch is already at 59 watts, whereas the 62-inch is still at 70 watts, over 15 watts better. Now, look at this. The 16-inch is already pushing the wattage up, whereas the 14-inch is still dropping down on this side. And you can see the same here on the actual clock speeds, whereas the 16-inch is over 4 gigahertz, whereas the 14-inch is under 4 gigahertz. Look at the difference in there. Both of the fans are on and they're trying to cool the machine down. 16-inch is around 60 watts, whereas the 14-inch is around 48, over 12 watts further down. Even though they're exactly the same, 12 cores and 8 super cores, if that makes sense. P and S, look, they've updated it in there. Both of the systems completed, and we can see that the 14-inch got 7,679 points on the 14-inch, and over 8,289 points on the 16-inch. So this tells us that Apple is thermally limiting the CPU on the 14-inch compared to the 16-inch. Let's do the same on the GPU now and try the GPU test. Now, there is a slight difference now. The 16-inch has 40 GPU cores and The 14-inch has 32 GPU cores. So the only difference is the GPU cores, but let's see if the power difference is any different. The 16-inch was pulling about 40 watts through the GPU, whereas the 14-inch was around 30 watts. So there's a lot more wattage going through the 16-inch than the 14-inch. And if you're looking at the GPU performance difference, you can see again 72,000 points compared to 90,000 points. That is a huge difference. Now that is just scratching the surface. I have tested these on all of the creative applications, so let's take a look what the actual difference is, because sometimes I saw some weird things happen. If you've seen this before and you are subscribed, double tap the screen right now. But if you haven't subscribed yet, then you're part of the 80% that are watching the videos but are not subscribed. Consider subscribing so you don't miss the future uploads. Now, when running multiple of these tests to make sure that I don't have any margins of errors on the Cinebench R26, I can see that the 16-inch is about 10% faster in multi-core performance while actually running exactly the same chip inside. So what Apple's not exactly truthful to you is that you think you're gonna get the same performance on the 14-inch. Well, that is not really the truth here. Even though having the same chip inside, you're not gonna get the same performance. You need the bigger laptop. But interestingly, Apple's not telling you that. They could have just shaved some cores off the M5 Max in there to really push you towards the 16-inch, which I think would have actually created more sales for the 16-inch, but they're not doing that here. In terms of single core performance, I can see that the 16-inch is 1% faster, so slightly faster as well, but I don't think that is really the case in here. That is within margin of error. Looking at Geekbench 6, and this is a very Apple benchmark, we can see that the 16-inch is literally within 1%, and I don't see any difference whatsoever. I've also added M4 Pro and M4 Max to a lot of these things. And again, if you want to see more of those benchmarks, scan the QR code or link in the description below for our benchmark database. But what we can see here is that the M4 Max is only 7% slower in the single core scores and 11% slower in the multi-core scores, which shows me that there is not that big of a difference between the M5 Max and M4 Max in terms of CPU performance, even though we supered our cores and performanced our efficiency cores, if that makes sense. Looks like a whole lot of branding to me. Very good branding though. What about the GPU now, where the actual neural engines are attached to the cores like leeches? Are these leeches making any difference? The 16-inch with the extra 8 cores is 18% faster in the OpenCL scores and 20% faster in the Metal scores. M4 Pro, interestingly, is quite a bit slower, and the M4 Max is basically the same performance as the new M5 Max with 8 cores less. So we can actually see a GPU difference. In fact, in OpenCL, the M4 Max with 40 cores from previous generation is 6% slower than the 32 core 14-inch new M5 MAX MacBook Pro. So again, here I have the M4 Pro and M4 Max as well, and the 14-inch M5 Max. Remember, the 14-inch has 32 cores. The 16-inch M5 MAX MacBook Pro is 9% faster in the single, about 6% faster in the half, and about 7% faster in the quantized scores. So that shows us that the more cores you have, it actually makes a difference. And the M4 Max is about 20% slower in the single compared to the 32 core version, 44 to 47% slower in the half and quantized scores compared to the 8 core less 32 core version. That's insane. So there is huge AI performance leap, what we can see in here. Let's take a look at actual benchmarks and performance. For example, Photoshop. What we can see here is the M5 Max, the 16-inch version, is slightly faster, but we can really say it's within margin of error. About 1% faster, that doesn't make any difference. The M4 Pro is about 70% slower. The M4 Max is about 5 to 6% slower than the new M5 Max. So in real application benchmarks like Photoshop, we're not seeing that big of a difference. It's still the fastest Photoshop machine I have ever tested. What about Adobe Lightroom Classic? And I've seen some people test Lightroom online, but Lightroom is a lot to do with online, and sometimes you're actually bottlenecked by the cloud or your internet connection. Lightroom Classic happens locally, and that's why I'm testing that one. So here, the 16-inch M5 MAX MacBook Pro is 12% slower than the 14-inch with less GPU cores. Now, I did not believe this, and I thought there must be something wrong in here. Believe me, I ran the benchmark about 8 times on both of these devices and was making sure that they're exactly the same, and for some reason, I'm getting these scores. The M4 Max here, interestingly, is about 16% slower. So if you look at the M4 Max and M5 Max 16-inch versions, they're within margin of error, like a couple of % difference. So you're not really gonna see a difference between the M5 Max if you're on M4 Max already. Moving on to video editing, and here in Premiere Pro, we can see that the 16-inch makes a difference, 11 to 14%. But here, I gotta mention that the GPU is very important as well. Having more GPU power here in video editing, it really helps you because the GPU can accelerate codecs and other things. The biggest difference what we can see there is the GPU effects, about 35 to 36% difference. In terms of other codec differences, we can see that there is about 6 to 5% difference in interframe and RAW, so that's the likes of ProRes and so on, is actually better when you upgrade your device. This is not particularly good test here to show the actual size difference, because here we also have a GPU difference. So what you're seeing in the application difference is not so much of a thermal performance difference, but more also of the GPU difference as well. And the M4 Max is slightly slower, about 3 to 8% slower. Again, I would say very hard to justify the M5 Max performance. What about After Effects? In here we can see that the 16-inch with more GPU cores is about 4% faster in standard overall scores, but extended overall scores slightly slower. The M4 Max is actually quite a bit faster. And here what we can see is, I think the new Apple Silicon with their new supers and non-supers, to be honest, in some of the applications, it's actually a bit of an L because we're not really optimized to the supers. You can see that the last generation MacBook is actually quite a bit faster. Our beloved Davinci Resolve, which is probably the most optimized out of these applications to these new M5 devices. And we can see that the M5 16-inch with more GPU cores gets about 8 to 9% increase over the 14-inch, which has 32 cores. Interestingly, the biggest difference is in RAW or GPU effects, about 15 to 16%. What we see there. The M4 Pro is quite a bit slower, but interesting, the M4 Max is around 8 to 13% slower than the new M5 Max, which is one of the biggest performance difference what we see between two generations in actual applications. The long GOP scores is quite a bit slower on the M4 Max, about 22%. Now, is that just to do with CPU performance, actually rendering this back, or is there any extra media engine support where the media engines have been improved? It's very hard to know because Apple doesn't tell us this, but these benchmarks suggest that maybe not. Maybe it's just to do with GPU performance. I don't know. I'll let the numbers speak for themselves. Now, I would like to show you more 3D rendering performance difference, but perhaps we're gonna have to make another video for that because those AI clusters around here, they're not really working so well yet, so we're gonna have to wait for that. Blender is not really firing up on my benchmarks. The actual application is, but to actually compare with some of the previous applications, I need the actual benchmark application to work, but there's some errors in there. So you might encounter that in your workflow as well. So conclusion, the M5 Max is hard to justify. The only thing I can see it being better for is AI. So if that's what you're after, fire away. For the rest of us, the M4 Max is a better price to performance version in pretty much every single way. In fact, I believe the M5 Max is actually better in battery life as well, because Apple is pushing so much more power through the new M5 Max to get these results. But they haven't got a better node from TSMC or a lower nanometer process. It's still built on the same 3 nanometer process. Yes, it's optimized and it's 3 something different, but that doesn't help with battery life as much as pushing 40 to 50% power sometimes through on these M5 Max devices compared to the M4, which is a huge difference, while not increasing the battery capacity on the M5 devices. So my advice would be, buy the M4 Max. For most people, that is a lot better. In fact, I can find some excellent condition M4 Max models for $3,600, the 16 model, which is a lot cheaper than these new M5 Maxes. I'm going to leave the link in the description below if you'd like to pick them up. Congratulations! If you've reached this part of the video, you're in the top 13% of people's attention graph. And there's more than 50% chance that you seeing this means you're not subscribed. So consider subscribing, hitting that bell icon, liking the video. It would mean a world to us. If you'd like to get detailed access to our internal benchmark database of CPUs, GPUs, SSDs, and so on for creators, then may I invite you to sign up to our newsletter, where we send out relevant information a couple of times a month when there is information. I'm not interested in flooding your inbox. This is when there is good information to share for your creative workflow, then we'll send those emails out. And also you'll get the most exclusive access to some of the behind the scenes, perhaps even giveaways. So scan that QR code or link in the description below. If you've got any urgent questions to me personally, you can always reach out on Minect. I'll always get back to my messages. If you're looking for a new hoodie, may I recommend this one. This is not just any cheap random hoodie. This is a high quality hoodie that you can get. And when purchasing this, we get a small little kickback to help us build what we're building here. My passion is to help creators choose the best tech for their workflow and help them save some money in the process. This is Tech Notice, and if you've reached this part of the video, you have been upgraded to the top 5% of the people who ever see this part. And now YouTube thinks that you'll like this video, and if you haven't subscribed, you can do it on this side. Thanks very much, guys, for watching. See you soon. Bye-bye.